Okay, we're going to get started. I'm going to just have a few housekeeping announcements. Just a reminder, if you are wanting professional development hours for ASLA, please sign up on the sign-up sheets out front. Also, for the field sessions tomorrow, the sheets are up front. At break at lunch today, right when we break for lunch, the field session leaders will meet with the groups to give you some information, maybe help how you're going to navigate, maybe you'll go together, that type of a thing, okay? So right when we break for lunch, before you head off to find your food, unless you're not concerned and you know where you're going, but I would suggest you just check in with them. We've had a request for an attendee list. What I can do after the symposium is send everyone a list of the names, the affiliation, and the email you used on Eventbrite to register. If you don't want that, if you don't want your name on the list, or you don't want that email used, please let me know, okay? I think a lot of them are professional emails, which is probably okay. They're on the web already, but please let me know. Tonight, we have our author reception and author talk, and that will be at 6 o'clock. The menu for that is up front, if you want to see what we're serving tonight. There will be one drink ticket tonight. It's a little bit shorter reception. Aww. Okay, it's beer and wine only, so it's more of a mini reception, but the food is still delicious. So that will be up front. Again, that will be Ralph DeMont and Ethan Carr will be talking about their new book, Olmsted and Yosemite, Civil War, Abolition, and the National Park Idea. If you go on the field trip tomorrow to Fairstead, the book will be there. Staff have asked to let you know that you need to have cash or check. Their credit card machine is not working if you want to purchase anything in the bookstore or gift shop. That's it for me. James has a few words.
Hello, my name's James. I'm with the National Park Service. You probably see me around taking pictures. I please ask that the presenters find me sometime today. I'd like to pull you all aside, It'll take 3 to 5 minutes. Just introduce yourself, introduce your paper. I'd like to have videos to help bring more attention to the work you all did. So find me. I'll either be up at the front or in the glass-walled room over there. You find me. It'll take 5-10 minutes at most. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're ready to start our first session, session 4. Who's our moderator for section 4? Betsy. Wendy. Come on up. Thank you. I'd be happy to do it. I just didn't grab not in front of me. I didn't know. You can introduce yourself? Come on up. Here we go. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Of course. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gina Wouters. I'm the Executive Director of Planting Fields Foundation, and I'm going to be co-presenting with Patricia O'Donnell today on the CLR that we developed in 2019. And I come to you not as somebody in the landscape profession at all. My career has actually been defined by working in historic sites. I worked at Vizcaya Museum and Gardens for about 11 years as a curator, and at Cheekwood Estate and Gardens in Nashville for about a year as a vice president for museum affairs, and now I've been at Planting Fields for, gosh, almost a little over 3 years. So that's my background. Okay. So today so who is familiar with planting? Because I always like to take a toll. 1, 2, like 5, 6 hands. Okay, that's great. So it's going to be a lot of new information for many of you. We have a lot to cover, so I will try and go as quick as possible. Here you see kind of outlined in yellow the footprint of planting fields. It is a 409-acre estate nestled really between Locust Valley and Oyster Bay on the north shore of Long Island. It was the estate of the Coe family, W.R. Coe and May Coe. W.R. Coe was an English immigrant and made his fortune really in the maritime insurance industry, and he did nothing better for himself than marry May Coe, who's actually the daughter of Henry Huddleston Rogers, who was a partner with John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil. And that's really where the fortune came from to create this estate, which was actually just one of their 5 homes throughout the country. So today we're going to be talking really about the Cultural Landscape Report and one of the key early initiatives that we're getting off the ground this month, really. And I want to say that I have not encountered anything in my career that has been as transformative as this CLR. Planting Fields has existed for over 70 years as a public site, but it was run as an arboretum, as a place for collections, really not understanding the historic significance of the Olmsted Brothers' vision for the site. So as a result of this Cultural Landscape Report that was completed in 2019, we adopted a new mission statement, we have a new strategic plan, we have kind of really a whole new education philosophy, interpretive plan, and of course, landscape restoration initiative. So just talking about, I just want to point out how this has been the catalyst for a whole new trajectory for our site. So the name Planting Fields in itself is kind of misleading. A lot of people think it has a lot of agricultural, kind of just farming references, which it does. But the name does come from the Minnetonka people, who were the early settlers on indigenous people on this land. And the name dates back to a 1689 deed from one English colonist to another, where they already refer to this area as Planting Fields. So it was retained by various generations of ownership, including the Coe family. So hence the name still being Planting Fields today. So our story starts with the Byrne family, who acquired the property starting really in 1904 and amassed several pieces of land together to create Planting Fields. In the 1910s, they started renting the property to the Coe family. And then in 1913, the Coes purchased the land. And here you see some details, some plans, some photographs. They were working with Guy Lowell and Andrew Robeson Sargent on the design of the property. And then in 1918, something really significant happened. 2 things. Sargent dies unexpectedly, and the house that stood there that was designed by Grosvenor Atterbury burned down. So they had the opportunity to create a whole new estate and think about working with a new firm, which is when the Olmsted Brothers entered the picture, and the whole new house is designed in a Tudor revival style. So here you see a lot of wonderful architectural, some drawings and photographs that were done by Maddie Edwards Hewitt. And this material has really been instrumental in identifying how we move forward with understanding the landscape and returning it back to what was intended. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of the features that the Olmsted Brothers introduced on the site. I did mention that the land is 409 acres and still retains that same exact acreage, which is pretty phenomenal. It's something that I've certainly not, that hasn't happened at Vizcaya or Cheekwood or any of the places I've worked at. This is the Vista Path, as you see here in this beautiful drawing. Again, over 400 plans at the archives at Brookline. A Hewitt photo showing that Vista Path. An aerial shot that shows kind of the layout of the land, that also really identifies the complex layered history of the site. So the Olmsted Brothers are certainly who we kind of talk about the most and who we refer to as we think about landscape restoration. But there is this James Greenleaf, who's first worked on the property with the Byrne family, and then Sargent and Lowell. So there's a complex history that we're talking about here, a layered history. Here you see a detailed Olmsted Brothers plan and an aerial photograph that really shows kind of that characteristic landscape. Circled here in yellow is the beech copse. So the aerial photograph from 1955 shows the beech copse and its relationship with the landscape. The later photograph from 2018 shows how the landscape has encroached on the beech copse. So the beech copse was a feature that was really found by Coe when he was traveling in England. He writes back to Dawson and he says, "I saw this grove of trees in a really peculiar cluster. I like that. I want to do it back at my property." So he got his beech copse. But in the 1960s, the state parks introduced a synoptic garden, as you see, kind of encroaching on the back of that beech copse. And so that the idea of that copse floating in a landscape, kind of on its own in a lawn, was lost. So as part of the CLR, we removed the existing beech copse, which was consisting of all sorts of dying and diseased beech trees, and moved it about 100 feet into the lawn to give it that space again, that border. the heather garden, so one of the earliest heather gardens at planting fields. At the same time, in the early 1920s, the Olmsted Brothers were introducing heather gardens in Tacoma, in Syracuse, across the street at planting fields at the Sanderson Estate, of course at Fort Tryon as well. This is our signature Olmsted 200 landscape restoration project. We're in the process of restoring this right now. It's about half an acre piece of land, but so easily done. So we're opening this on April 26th officially. The Kershalton Gates. This marked the original entrance to planting fields from Chicken Valley Road. And Coe, if you kind of see on the photographs on the right, these monumental gates, they're from 1720 from England. And Coe found them and wrote to Dawson and said, I found these wonderful gates. I want them to mark the main entrance. Get your mind to work on it. That's literally what he writes in the correspondence. He also acquired about 5 to 10 acres in addition to allow them to build the correct approach to the land at that time. Again, another great photograph that shows the continuity, the change over time from 1955 to 2018, and really this evolution of a site that's been managed as an arboretum, as a place for collections, versus a site that's defined by design. And so now we're at this interesting point where we're trying to bring those two facets together. So the CLR is about a 600-page document, and the reference was made yesterday to plans that sit on a shelf and get dusty, and that is exactly what this plan does not do. We reference it all the time. I think we've produced probably 25 different copies to give out to stakeholders, to staff, to use, to really guide their work day by day. We developed 2 guiding principles as we created the CLR with Heritage Landscapes. And another stakeholder that's been involved is New York State, because they actually own the site. So the Coe family gave the property to the state of New York in 1955. Planting Fields Foundation was created in 1952. So there's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people who have a lot to say about what the future of this place should be. So the guiding principle you see below there. And then we created a second one also to really recognize the era of collections and the future of that and the need to balance those 2 facets of the site. So finally, for my slide, in terms of thinking about how to organize and classify the site in a very new way, we developed, as part of the CLR, 9 landscape character areas. You see them outlined on the top there. And then here, the green area, which is about half of the cultivated acres. The pink and the blue are woodland areas and kind of active function areas. But the yellow and the green are areas that are active landscapes. So the green is what we need to restore. So those are all areas that were designed by the Olmsted Brothers. So we have our work cut out for us. And Patricia will be speaking about the main entrance drive that we're getting off the ground now. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. Well done. So I'm Patricia O'Donnell, founder, partner at Heritage Landscapes. We have had the great opportunity to work with planting fields on this CLR. This is our 55th Olmsted Legacy landscape that we've had the privilege to work on over the years. And one of the things that Gina kind of jumped over was that everything we're doing now, we're reminding our clients that we're not in a vacuum. We're not only looking internally at a site, we're looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals and what they mean to sites and how we can think globally, act locally in a really more comprehensive and, I think, appropriate for our times manner. So in this case, there are 5 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that are resonant with planting fields: good health and well-being, safe and sustainable cities, climate action, life on land, and partnerships. One of the processes, and Gina has indicated that there are a lot of stakeholders, is getting everybody on the same page. So the CLR also became a tool for consensus building. So this is a diagram of the site that's looking on the left at where the circulation has issues, particularly for safety with conflicts between vehicles and people on foot. And on the right, some of the opportunities to upgrade and remove service access so that the service people who are working every day and running around the site are not in conflict with the pedestrians, but also ways of rethinking some of the circulation. So when you're looking at an Olmsted landscape, you're looking to put any new insertions of links of circulation in the style of, in the character of, not to falsify the place, but to be very clear that it needs to work for the needs of today. It's not a private estate. It has a high visitation, about 250,000 people, and it needs to have functionalities and safety on a daily basis. So this is another diagram from the overall plan that basically highlights the projects. So in addition to giving them like an overall treatment plan, which is not what I'm showing you here, I'm saying, okay, here are all the colored areas where things have to happen. Change has to be created. So if you could look at this, hey, the color I'm wearing, this turquoisey color, you will see this, what FLO Senior talked about as an articulated edge that would create a sense of distance. So everything has this, looks like a cauliflower, right? This in and out kind of edge so that things are in the foreground, things are in the midground, and things are in the background. And if you have that spatial sequence, your eye extends the space. So they worked with this tool of shaping space that made spaces feel and be perceived to be larger, which then gives you a sense of wonder and beauty and immersion in place. This technique was used at the Capitol, was used at Central Park, Prospect Park, et cetera, et cetera. But if you've worked on a number of Olmsted landscapes, you get what their style is and how they work with these things. So the edge had been flattened and also interrupted by the collections. So the recapture of the edge is an important project. Now this peach color, pink, peach, whatever, is about establishing meadow habitat because of the 409 acres, plus or minus half the area is designed, and half of it is former farm fields and woods. And the fields and the woods have the opportunity to host nature. Put us back in the UN SDGs, put us back in life on land. How do we then bring a historic site, which is, in its most crass terms, a rich white man? How do we bring in other vectors for visitors? How do we bring in the meanings and the values of this place? So if we take half that acreage and accentuate habitat and nature, we have a whole nother opening to society and to our well-being. So here is the fields of 55 and the fields of 2018. They've taken some of that area, as you can see in gray, to create some event parking, but they've recently backed away from these huge events, the big concerts and so forth, because they're not mission-driven. But look at the amount of green space that they're mowing, and they're mowing with fossil fuels. So if we can shift that over time and go to meadow habitat and not mow or mow very infrequently, we have a whole gain for nature and for people. So this is the image that we created at the end of the CLR for that, to move forward with that idea in a compelling way of taking historic fields and turning them into habitat. On the lower right there is bobolinks, and the songbirds are particularly threatened right now because of farming and mowing. So if we recognize and look globally again, planting fields is on the northeastern flyway down the Atlantic. So if we can have these fields as meadows, we also have a refuge for field birds And this is our woodlands. On the left is the current outline of woods, and what you see on the left image with the dark center is the science tells us that the woods have to be 100 meters deep and have an interior area in order to host woodland species. So interior woodland species are different than woodland edge species. If we just take that eastern edge of the woods, flatten it out, and increase the woods a little bit, we have a larger, that's the image on the right, a larger and more contiguous interior woods for interior dwelling forest species that would be on site. The migratory species would be in the meadows and on the edges. I'm oversimplifying. You know, there's a lot of ecology that could be talked about. I'm just giving you the ideas. And then here's the thinking about how do you work with forest scenery. And as the woods become stronger, suppression of invasive species, planting of natives, and so forth and so on. Also, the thinking about where the paths are so that those interior species are unmolested by people and they're at the outer edges is an important piece. So the entry drive is the project we are working on with planting fields, and we're in design and parsing out the documents. And the image here is 55, and you see along the drive a rhythm of trees on both of these drives. The main drive was actually European beech. The drive that you see running to the left-hand side is linden. A number of the lindens are still there. The beeches, however, have not fared well. Those of you who know about European beech, you know that we've got a lot of disease vectors right now, and even a new one, the beech leaf problem. So if we look at 56 and we look at where we are today, if you just focus on this linear ribbon of the drive coming off Planting Fields Road, you see what is sort of mostly in LA with some gaps on the 56 side, but on the 2020 side, it doesn't even look like a row anymore. So your sense of arrival is pretty flat. So this is the proposed plan, and you'll note that the trees are, of course, shown small because they're going to be new trees, but they're also spaced farther apart. So when you're working with this kind of thing, you say, okay, what is the character of this detail? What did the Olmsted Brothers and Coe do? And in this case, the beeches were planted at 24-foot centers. Beeches grow quite wide. They were touching in a relatively short time, like 10 years. And beeches graft roots with each other, passed diseases along the row, and didn't really have space to mature. So the dialogue was about what are we going to plant? How are we going to proceed? This is a simulation we did, Greg actually did, that shows the main drive. We've highlighted those trees in a brighter green of the proposed spacing. And then there was the dialogue about what are the trees. So our brief on the project is give us a 100-year project. We got plenty to do. We can't do it over. Think 100-year timeline. So this is just a simulation of chinkapin oak grown out to a 45-year size. And what you see is that they spread well, and they have a nice full head, and you can open the bottom. So we moved to the oaks. Now, those of you who are, familiar with arboriculture, the red oak families are having some problems. We looked at the white oaks because we're looking at a long-lived tree, we're looking at a tree that can mature, and we're looking at a 100-year timeline. This is something that came across my windscreen recently from the National Capital Planning Commission talking about the Pennsylvania Avenue and the core area and just summarizing the benefits of trees so that it's out there and you can say, okay, here, check, 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 here are all the benefits. We went a little farther and did the numbers on the size by caliber of these trees for their carbon sequestration, for their stormwater absorption, and from their energy conservation from temperature reduction. So these are the numbers of what the benefits of the trees are. So this is actually an easy find. It's Arbor Day, and they have the calculator on the web, as everything is these days, but you gotta know where to look. And then this is the current state of the drive. On the left, it has this small entry booth that interrupts the arrival and also pushed out the width of the drive. So the drive was a sinuous 18 to 20 foot corridor with rows of trees both sides. The booth creates a gap. Turns out COVID did a favor for us. They don't use the booth anymore. And this is the simulation on the right of the drive brought back to its 20-foot width. No reason to stripe it. In fact, those in traffic management say no stripe in the middle makes people go slower. This is our stakeout of the trees about, I don't know, 8 or 10 days ago, and a board group on site and a little detail on the right showing the stake. So the trees are not 24 feet apart, they're 45 feet apart. And what's the character definition that you're looking for? A rhythm of continuous trees in a zigzag pattern. Number one, is this going to achieve that character? Yes. Is it going to live 100 years? We sure hope so. It's what all the efforts are directed toward. And then this is the entry to the Synoptic Garden, which is the collection of plants that is highly visited, that is used as an educational asset, that is valued. But it's also created a gap in the drive. So close that gap, and then you will note on the bottom a new path, because as a publicly visited space, it's hard to get access all the way along this drive and to the Synoptic, to the rhododendron groves, and to Coe Hall. So this is the view toward the Camellia House and a simulation of the trees at 40 years with the dappled light that is so gorgeous and has a wonderful feeling walking under. So we're running tight on time, but the accessible walk is this line along the top. And the current discussion is what is the material. Now remember, we have a 100-year timeline. So we've seen 100-year-old concrete at a number of sites. We know it has a big carbon footprint, but we also know that there are now additives to concrete like recycled glass and other types of additives that can reduce the carbon footprint of the concrete. Where the tape measure is sitting in this view is concrete that we laid 20 years ago in Camden, New Jersey at a park, and it had a retardant on the surface and a specified aggregate so that it would have a feeling of a gravel surface. It's likely that that is very close to what was at the Capitol originally, not the gold gravel that's there today. And then there are contemporary products. None of them has been tested more than 20 years. And pervious paving requires the ability for the water to infiltrate. You have to have an infiltration subsurface under a pervious walk or a pervious parking lot. Otherwise, you're perching water under your paving. So this is still in dialogue. And the last component that I'll speak with you about is this entry margin drives. So you gotta love really nice Olmsted drawings. Look at this mess on the left. This is a field study in 1918 that recorded what was behind the beach and made a series of recommendations about what to remove and what to add. This is the only design document for that edge. So we did a study of it, looking at what the trees are, particularly the flowering trees, because the idea is that there's flowering trees and shrubs behind the tree LA that create a background edge and that create a seasonal interest immediately behind those trees. So it's not just a row of trees. So I'll just point out one aspect of it. It's the hawthorns, the crataegus. If you look on the upper right detail, it's the little bright violet dots. That one is pulsed along the drive at about a 80-foot interval. The redbuds and the cherries and the dogwoods are clustered. So it's not really, rhythmic, it's more episodic. And the episodes vary. So we've got a lot of complexity here just in this little background planting. So we're looking at how to address that, and in the bright green, this is over the top of our CAD drawing, we're showing the existing flowering trees. So the flowering trees that were there were in the 150 count range. The flowering trees we have today is about 60, and they're not necessarily the same or the right types, but the discussion of what we call the drive margin planting is underway. So this is what bringing a cultural landscape report to the ground for one little project to restore a main entry LA is all about. Thank you.
All right, here we are. I'm the next moderator. So our next speaker is Rhonda Buell-Shire. Rhonda, did I do it? Excellent. Rhonda is the superintendent of the Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial. She has served at Mount Rushmore National Memorial, Independence National Historical Park, Valley Forge National Historical Park, and Gateway Arch National Park. Rhonda got around, yes. As the Arts Museum Director, Rhonda coordinated a complex partnership project to design, fabricate, and install accessible exhibits and media as part of a transformation of facilities and grounds, incorporating features of universal design to welcome all visitors. At Lincoln Boyhood, she leads a trail renovation project while preserving the historical landscape. Rhonda also served as a classroom teacher, a curriculum author, and a professional development facilitator for adult learners. Rhonda. Yay.
Good morning, everybody. It is lovely to be here. I thank you for the invitation. My name is Rhonda Shear, Superintendent of Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial in Southern Indiana. I'm often referred to as Ranger Rhonda. And my sign language name is the letter R over my badge 2 times, Ranger Rhonda. And the kids often call me R2 for short. So Today, I'm representing a variety of national parks in the National Park Service, a few of the 425, all who are facing accessibility challenges and incorporating accessibility solutions. So as Deb referred to, here's a photo collage that represents some of my history of service in the National Park Service. And you can see the loop through the visuals. I seem to have embarked on a presidential story. I'd love to share with you more details about the significance of the cultural landscapes and all of the architecture and the ways that the interpretation and education messaging and thematic design is changed over the last couple of decades, but that would be a different story. So I will move on and get back to the story we're here about today. So I was thrilled to see this tagline on one of the title pages for the Olmsted 200, Parks for All People. That to me resonates because that is so in line and dovetails so well with the priorities of the National Park Service for relevance, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. Our commitment is to have our parks be welcoming and inclusive and easily accessible for all people, considering any ability, disability, or preference. The idea is that we don't want our parks to be for certain people or some people, but truly parks for all people. So I delved into the research of Frederick Olmsted Jr. I inherited a trail project that was limited to securing funding for a resurfacing to make it more compatible for people who use mobility devices. And so I heard the name Olmsted a couple of years ago and started doing some research and understanding the significance of his influence. The fact that he says he learned so much from his father about the interrelationship of people with nature really works well with the themes and objectives that we have with the National Park Service. You heard Tim mention yesterday that Olmsted Jr. is often given credit for some of the key vocabulary of the Organic Act, which established the mission and direction of the National Park Service to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. One thing I especially love about this is that in our design work in the National Park Service, we often work with the Denver Service Center. And to see that their #1 standard for all design work is that it must adhere to the Organic Act represents the commitment to that philosophy. So the Lincoln Boyhood National Memorial is one of 4 parks that represent the lifeline of Abraham Lincoln. There's the Lincoln birthplace in Kentucky. His childhood home from age 7 to 20 was in Indiana. We have the Lincoln home in Springfield, Illinois, where he worked as a lawyer. And then, of course, there's the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln said about his childhood, "It was a wild region with many bears and other wild animals in the woods. There I grew up." And this is a quote that was attributed to Lincoln by Mrs. Crawford, a neighbor in the community. She says that he said, "I will study and get ready, and perhaps my chance will come." Rather profound for a young pioneer boy who grew up to be probably the most well-known, renowned leader internationally. We tell the story of a self-educated boy. Abraham Lincoln often said he went to school by littles, only accomplishing a total of 2 years of education in the classroom. The rest of the time it was self-educated books at home. Here's a couple of our teenage volunteers representing the pioneer lifestyle. They're standing and sitting at the entrance to the log barn. Here's a mother who brought her children to hear the story of Abraham Lincoln at the Boyhood Memorial. Families often begin at the visitor center, which you see there. The design of the visitor center was recommended by Frederick Olmsted Jr. And then their first destination in their outdoor tour is the flagpole, one of the tallest in the National Park Service. Again, a recommendation by Rick Olmsted. They proceed to the grave of Nancy Hanks Lincoln. This is why the area was first established as a memorial by the local citizens. This is the framework of the reason for the park's existence when Nancy Hanks Lincoln was held in such reverence as a pioneer mother. They move on to the reconstructed Lincoln Cabin. This is the way that people get a sense of the pioneer lifestyle in an 8 by 20-foot log cabin. This is where Sarah Lincoln, Tom's second wife, came to lead a blended family of her children and Tom Lincoln's children when he married her. And Sarah Lincoln has been quoted as saying, "Abraham was the best boy I ever knew." Added to the park experience 50 years ago was the Living Historical Farm. This was an add-on idea to help people understand the farming methods of a pioneer homestead. Our story today is the story of the trail renovations. This was our goal, to have a fully accessible trail, not only with a new hardened surface that's compatible with the mobility devices, but how could we help the people have an alternate approach to the upper level of the park besides the stairs that are part of the historical landscape. It sounds like a pretty simple concept, but it proved to be complex and sometimes complicated, so our letter of the day is the letter C. I'm going to walk you through the steps of the project by littles, including the commitment of our agency to accessibility, the commitment to the preservation of the Olmsted landscape, the concept that Olmsted brought into the cultural landscape, the conundrum that we faced in 2020 on how to incorporate accessibility features that they did not think of in 1927, how we were dependent on collaboration and consultation to come up with a workable plan, the compliance issues that we went through, the contracting, the construction, the cost, and the community involvement, and of course our commitment renewed for what we want to do in the future. This is how I spell questions, to begin with the letter C. And so we're happy to take questions from you later, but I'd like to toss out a crucial question for your consideration, as is a good strategy for any educational moment. What would Rick think of what we're doing to change and modify the historic landscape in 2020? Now, it's interesting to hear our presenters talk about cultural landscape reports. That's one of many different kinds of foundation documents that we consult in our decision making. You can see pictured here some of my favorites, including the Cultural Landscape Report, the Historic Grounds Report, the General Management Plan, the Foundation Document. In the Park Service, we like to say that we are dependent on data-driven decision-making. It's so much better to have an understanding of the history of our park than flipping a coin, even if it happens to be a Lincoln penny. And it's really helpful to have the information when you're in a group conversation, much better than saying, "I'm pretty sure I have no idea." So there were a lot of different opinions on what to do with this preservation of a Nancy Hanks Lincoln gravesite. The care of the area went through disrepair and renewed interest. It went through county commissioners. It went to state associations. And these are the kinds of things and features that were installed at this small memorial site in southern Indiana. They had iron gates, lion sculptures, eagles on columns, ornamental urns, garden nest plants, a road to the cemetery, and a picnic area very near Nancy Hanks' gravestone for people to gather and have lunch. So considering how well you know Rick Olmsted, how much you've learned about Rick in the last couple of days, this is time for the Ask the Audience. So if you would, consider when I take the survey how you anticipate Frederick Olmsted Jr. to react to this park plan when he came for his first visit. So the survey goes like this. Thumb means none. You don't think he liked it at all. And you can vote anywhere between 1 and 5. 1 doesn't like it much, 5 likes it a lot. And an invitation to our virtual viewers. Sophia has set up a survey to see what they want to say online by entering a number. So, give you a little thinking time. Think like Rick. Survey says, show me your vote. Hands up. And you can look around the room and see what people are voting. That's okay. You can change your vote if you want to. Okay, I see some thumbs for none, a couple of twos, a couple more twos. A sideways vote might mean I'm not sure, still thinking. So I don't see anything 4 or 5, do you? Maybe not. So let's call on Rick and see what he has to say. Well, what would Rick think? So in 1926, the governor created the Indiana-Lincoln Union in order to help the people of the state in mighty unison rear a national shrine honoring the Lincolns. At one of its initial meetings in 1927, they hired the noted landscape architect, Frederick Olmsted Jr. They wanted someone to indicate quite clearly and definitely the general lines of character of the development. Olmsted's concept. He visited the Lincoln Memorial Site in March 1927, returned to present his preliminary concept in May 1927. I love the note in the historic records. The ideas were received with great enthusiasm. Notice the headline gives you a hint on his reaction. He wrote, "It is most unfortunately true that present conditions confuse and distract the visitor's attention from thought of Lincoln and of the significance of all that befell him here. These distracting sights are the result of mischance and neglect and the intrusion of utilitarian structures of a very different time period. Of the former class are the railway track and the highway with its rushing automobiles and the buildings scattered on and around the site. Of the latter class are the cast iron gates with their gilded concrete lions, the bits of garden-esque lawn with exotic shrubs, and the general slicking up of the woodland around the grave." As a first step, he wanted to simplify, a word that comes up often in a study of Olmsted's designs for landscapes. He termed the upper area of the grave and cabin sites the sanctuary and felt that they should be similarly treated. The immediate sanctuary should be freed of every petty, distracting, alien, self-asserting object, making it easy and natural for people to be stimulated to their own inspiring thoughts and emotions about Lincoln. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. It keeps coming up in any of our research in the historic documents. So, with that in mind, and that his ideas were received most enthusiastically, gone went the iron gates, disappeared were the lion sculptures, the eagles on columns went away, the gardeners' plants disappeared, the road to the cemetery was removed, and there was no longer a picnic area at the gravesite. Now, for those of you that are wondering where the lions may have ended up, our technology crew did a sound check. We'll see if we can have a little bit of music here. So who can name the artist that performed at one of our community parks in southern Indiana? Bruce Coburn. We've got a winner. You have received the decorated Abraham Lincoln sugar cookie for your contribution. You may have noticed our artist's name begins with the letter C. Bruce Coburn at a Ferdinand Folk Festival in one of our local parks, 2019. Now, I thought I might have spotted the lions at the Boston Library the other night, but alas, they were not ours. The local historians tell us that the lions, now headless, rest in nearby Lincoln Lake, and the fate of the gilded plaster eagles remains unknown. Olmsted realized with everything gone, some sort of monumental expression was needed, and that was his proposed alley. There it is in its simplicity and its beauty. It seems so simple, you wonder why nobody thought of it before. It's a wide sweep of lawn, it's 2 parallel trails lined by dogwood shrubs, tulip trees, and sycamore trees that blend into the forest. The eye takes you to the elevated rise to what is considered the sanctuary, to help the visitor feel like they are being immersed in the environment and going to a higher level of thought and emotion as they approach Nancy Hanks Lincoln's burial site. Olmsted wrote, "I'm inclined to believe that one and only one large and conspicuous object, idealistic in significance, could be used as the dominant object in such a composition without impertinence to the sanctuary within. That object is," you can see in the picture, "the great flagpole bearing the American flag." Olmsted directed that the parking area should be somewhat removed from the core of the memorial so that visitors could proceed on foot into the sanctuary under conditions favorable for producing the right impression. Now notice the antique photo here of processional is replicated to this day every year on Lincoln's birthday. The cars are still remaining in the background as the visitors proceed on foot. One of the main justifications for making them walk the considerable distance from where they leave their cars is they should have time before entering the woods and coming upon the grave to shake off, as it were, the busyness and preoccupation of contemporary life. Here's the drawing he presented to the Lincoln Union in 1927, May 7th. You can see that the road that bisects the park at the lower end, that has been removed. They moved the road to the outer perimeter of the park to take away the traffic that would be bisecting the park. The railroad tracks still exist at the northern end of the park. Now, coincidentally, that same summer season of 1927, there was another group of local boosters in the Black Hills of South Dakota who gathered with the sculptor Gutzon Borglum and President Coolidge to commemorate Rushmore Rock, which would become another presidential memorial to help share the story of the presidents to future generations. If you look closely at the man in the white suit in the middle, that's my grandfather who spoke that day about why George Washington should be carved on the mountain, to tell the story to future generations, yet unborn, about the presidential legacy. Here's our conundrum. At the end of the alley trails, we have a set of stairs. When Olmsted talked about proceeding on foot, there wasn't consideration about people who may not be able to proceed on foot. We found ourselves collaborating to a great deal of teamwork effort for designing not only the width of the trail, the surface to be chosen, and how we would put in an alternate route to be in addition to the stairs. We had models designed, we had drawings made, we had team conversations. One suggestion was to have one entire sloping ramp from the parking lot to the upper level. Not feasible, not economic, certainly not supporting the landscape design. We talked about doing improved social trail where wheelchairs could get around the trail. Lots of things to consider in a collaborative space. This was one of the team meetings that I really appreciated, coordinated by one of our regional office staff. It wasn't just an itinerary of talking points, but I call this the Let's Leave With itinerary. This was a conference call with historic preservationists, with landscape architects, funding managers, maintenance folks, all trying to come up with a good workable plan. Let's leave with an understanding of the design. Let's leave with an understanding of the formal designation. Let's leave with a decision about the surface. Let's leave with a decision about the stairs. Let's leave with a determination of staff roles and with an understanding of the contracting needs. This was an example of a highly effective conference call where one of the facilitators at regional office said, "I feel like Santa Claus because I've been able to put into effect the prerequisites to an effective program." Here's the design we agreed on. We call this the modified light bulb. This gives us the opportunity to have 2 spur trails hidden in the woods. The first proposal was 1 trail. I wanted 2, so any visitor, whether they chose the east trail or the west trail, would not come up to a dead end, but be able to access an alternate route to the upper level. The flagpole serves as the filament in the middle of the modified light bulb. We had consultation with the public, with displays of surface choices, with drawings, with maps. We also invited our park neighbors who use mobility devices to come and try out the trail. This is Mike and Michael. One has a manual wheelchair, one has a motorized wheelchair. We were very surprised to hear what surface they preferred. The concrete aggregate, they said, would give them more traction. We thought that smooth concrete would probably be their choice. It was very ironic and helpful because our cultural resource people told us the only surface that was compatible with the historic design was the exposed concrete aggregate. Worked out well. Compliance, our cultural resource specialists were very helpful with us on helping us to figure out different workable solutions when we would start with ones that were not supportive of our historic design. We had a lot of conversation back and forth. The final update here from our historic landscape specialist says, final design does minimize changes. The formal symmetry of the flanking walks is consistent with the overall design. Our conundrum was the fact that Olmsted's design was columnar, straight, symmetrical. We wanted to introduce the curved lines of slope trails. The solution was, you can see by the sample here, we chose to do curved trails out of the visitor's initial view from the parking lot. They don't encounter the curved lines until they get closer to their choices. SHPO agreed with the Park Service's finding, no adverse effect. It was a happy day when we could close and complete compliance. Contracting, we worked with our major acquisition buying office team at regional office to administer a contract with the Acon General Firm in Louisville, Kentucky. The contract overview included removing the already existing concrete pads you can see piled up there in the picture, and the exciting part for us was the 2 additional new walkways that would be designed. Construction went well. Of course, we had a few rain delays, which is demonstrated by our waterlogged construction sign, but everything did go well when they started to move the dirt and bring in the big equipment. They did the substrate, they did the rebar, they framed the walkways, and we got ready for the wonderful day when the new concrete trucks arrived and we were ready to pour. This is the plan. The modified light bulb shows the new paved paths at the visitor center where people have access to the amenities at the visitor center, and all the way up both sides of the alley trail, and 2 options of the modified light bulb to the upper level. I said to our contractors, might it be difficult to transport all that wet mud in wheelbarrows and buckets to the areas where the trucks can't go? They said, well, watch this. They brought what we call the mud buggies. And so if you don't think construction looks fun, take a look at this movie. So that worked really well to transport the heavy mud from the truck location all the way up to the distant trail to get the concrete in place. A little bumpy, but very efficient, and to me, it looks like a lot of fun. Spreading out the concrete to make it smooth, this is what the visitors encounter. As they go up either side of the alley trail, they come to a 90-degree turn where they can go into a trail that's hidden from view at the initial view shed at the parking lot to make an alternate approach besides the stairs. The woodland walkways, they call them, are hidden from the long-range view. That was the secret to compliance. I call this paved and pretty. The project was awarded in 2020. The cost was $600,000. Now what you see is our community enlarged, our community expanded, more people able to share in the common experience, share in the park landscape with their friends, with their families, with their colleagues, in an equal experience in an approach to the upper level of the park. Here's a before and after. Doesn't look much different, but it makes a lot of difference to a lot of people. What you can see is the hint of the new trails in the distance where the straw covers the new grass seed. At this point, they're not visible because of the new grass and the trees that are filled out. The woman with the walker had a very happy day going all the way through the alley experience that she would not have been able to do otherwise. Our community of Lincoln includes the joggers and the walkers, the babies in strollers, the people pulling toddlers in wagons, and we love that the universal design feature helps people enjoy the park even if they weren't especially in mind when we did accessibility features. They enjoy the park because of the accessibility trail. Our commitment is continued with plans to do more trail work, to do more programmatic and intellectual accessibility with waysides and tactile exhibits and wayfinding. The reforestation project was recommended by Olmsted in 1927, and our Iowa Conservation Corps is on site this week, their third year planting baby oaks, white and black oaks and hickory, to reestablish the type of forest that was in place when Abraham Lincoln lived there as a youth. Olmsted said that a recreated forest would be the only one of now vanished features of the place characteristic of Lincoln's time. We followed universal design features, most notably, number 2, it provides choice in methods of use, but an equal opportunity for our visitors. People can choose either route, have a choice of preferences for sun or shade, direct or indirect, a path, or the stairs. Parks for all people help everybody understand better the 14 years that Abraham Lincoln spent with his family and friends. I always like to include an invitation to the park to come whenever you are able to. And I'd like to thank our crew at the park who make it all happen, introduce you to the critters, which is the highlight of everyone's park visit, show you the candlelit cabin where children learn to read by lantern, our volunteers in historic clothing that help share the story, and our kusha, which is a historic, accurate plant that we grow in the crop fields. And I end with a picture of Ellie, our youngest volunteer, as a reminder of the future generation that we are preserving the landscape for, sharing the story with, and promising full accessibility as best we can. So the crucial question tossed back at you, what would Rick think? Thank you.
Thank you so much to our two speakers for incredibly thought-provoking and incredibly thoughtful projects and design. So I'd like to open it up for questions and invite our speakers to come forward, see if there are any questions from the audience. We have, I think, Sarah in the back. Do we have a mic?
Hi. On the accessibility in historic parks, I might have missed it because I couldn't read all the slides, but through the woodlands, were there mature trees that you had to decide how to balance between tree preservation and where the path went? Yes.
Yes, we had about 3 that were definitely in the path. We actually just, you could see in the modified light bulb, we had a few little curves in the curves to accommodate the mature trees, but there were 3 that went down with plans to replace with future plantings.
Next, I think Isley there in the red. Yeah.
This is for Rhonda, too. I was not able to keep up. The varieties of trees that were in the native forest when the Lincolns arrived, you mentioned hickory. What were the other? Oak. Oh, just oak. Okay. And also in the list of National Park Service sites related to Lincoln, did you mention the summer house at the Soldiers' Home?
Oh, no, I didn't. Good, thank you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
In Washington, D.C., that's
Yes,
another one.
Yes. And Ford's Theater and the Arlington
Oh,
House,
right,
yes.
yeah.
Very good. And I was going to mention, too, that our forestry project is, I think, showing a lot of integrity because they have researched the Forest Survey data from the 1800s of what was growing there to come up with a decision on what to plant as a contemporary forest. Interestingly enough, our people working on the site this week came with an abundance of, I believe it was white oak, and trying to grab any black oak that the nurseries have right now because it's either the white or the black are in short supply. So every now and then we get a call and say, I found 30 more. So yeah, that survey that they rely on I thought was a really great way to make the decision making.
Thank you. I think we have a question from online.
So this question comes from Lori Matthews, and she mentions that she loves the idea of converting a large mow area to meadow. She's tried to do that, but they've received a great deal of pushback. So she wanted you guys to talk a little bit about the process of making that recommendation and how did you get the buy-in?
Thanks, Lori. Lori's actually taking some time off and is writing in from Florence, Italy. She used to work with us in Connecticut and Vermont. So the question of meadow transition is tricky. And the buy-in is basically former fields and reduction of mowing and reduced staff. The process of effecting the shift from mown turf to meadow is not an easy one. So any of us who've ever tried that know there is the issue of seed in the soil that you don't want. There is the issue of establishment maintenance. I think at planting fields, the buy-in is not the issue. The issue is going to be the transition process, the costs, and the level of effort to get there. We did have an opportunity, one that I mentioned yesterday at Jackson Park, that was a little different contracting. It was a 2-year build and a 3-year maintenance. So when you're dealing with native species, that 1-year guarantee, which is essentially, is this alive or dead, is not enough. So the question of having a contracting process with a longer hands-on maintenance process, I think, arises when you're dealing with this kind of transition.
Great answers, I think, up here in front.
Hi, this is a question for Planting Fields. Obviously, it's a huge project, and you have 2 entities. You have both the state and the foundation. Can you talk a little bit about the division of labor as to who is responsible for what and how you foresee this kind of unfolding?
That is a great question. I think we're still trying to figure some of that out. Fortunately, the foundation has a really strong endowment. So many people get the impression that the state actually underwrites a lot of what we do, but it's the opposite. So up until now, everything related to the cultural landscape report and the implementation of any of the initiatives have been underwritten by the foundation. New York State does have operations staff that live on site, but they've been maintaining the property really as an arboretum, and so it's quite a different skill set. So last year, the foundation for the first time ever established a landscape team. We hired a historic landscape horticulturist and 2 technicians who really are charged with the implementation of the CLR and working closely with Heritage Landscapes on the plans, the implementation, and the long-term maintenance. So it's an ongoing kind of fluid process, but in terms of funding, that's entirely coming from the foundation and also kind of the grant writing for that alt foundation.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question from online.
Yes, and this question comes from Wagner, and he asks, for the drive trees, how do you balance the need for historical uniformity and longevity with the risk of planting a monoculture?
The monoculture thing is really interesting in the fact that we're dealing with 409 acres and we have huge diversity. We were less concerned about the drive, one piece of drive, than we would have been had it been like an urban situation. We know from Olmsted records in Louisville that one of the ways they planted the Louisville parkways was to have a stretch in 2 different types of trees either side, and then when it bent, they changed the trees, and then when it bent again, they changed the trees. So, and then years ago, there was a study and a project done in Philadelphia on the parkway between the museum and William Penn on the top of City Hall, and that was done in a sequence of, the original was all red oak. It was done red oak, red maple, red oak, sweet gum, so it was A, B, A, C. And the choice of those trees was trees of the same stature and of the same visual texture and of the same mature height. Now, they won't be perfect, but, so I'm just trying to give you a framework that there are LAs that can be done in different ways. In this case, we're actually using white oak and chinkapin oak, and the foreground row will be the chinkapin, which has a mature height around 45 feet. And the background row will be the white oak, and the white oak has a mature height of 60 to 80 feet. So the idea here is that with two varieties of the white oak family, and with such amazing diversity across the site, there was less of an issue about monoculture. So we're kind of biculture, but on a really diverse site.
Great, we have I think this gentleman was, no, did I get it wrong? Two more questions, yeah.
I was wondering with planting fields, with the process of converting the fields to meadows also, is there a concern that that'll make it harder to manage invasive species, and then particularly, across the whole property, and then particularly if you're not mowing?
The short answer is the literature's pretty deep now on meadow establishment. 25 years ago, not so much, but the species that are going to survive and what's going to work well, I think, are fairly well known, and the invaders are also fairly well known. It is about management. So the short answer is you can't take your hands off the land, but you can make the transition.
Gina, this question was for you. You spoke a lot about trying to negotiate the past of the site and it really being an arboretum and needing to elevate this new idea of the intent of the design landscape. I'm curious if you could speak maybe a little bit about how your interpretive master plan addresses the need to balance kind of interpretive elements in the landscape with the design of the landscape.
So we don't have that yet. We actually have a master plan that the state produced in 1991. Sorry? Oh yeah, very out of date, and we already started conversations to kick off the development of a new master plan. The CLR, as I mentioned, has really been the catalyst, has been informing so much of what we're doing and our priorities, and the great thing about it is that it was jointly developed with the state and the foundation involved, as well as other stakeholders from the outside. So it's, but I think it's a matter of also the people who've been involved and engaged in the property for many decades being welcoming this idea of an expanded identity of planting fields. And I mean, we talked a lot about the landscape, but it's a historic site. There's historic structures, there's significant architecture, there's significant interior design, art collections as well. It's a really dynamic place, and that's actually something that has been a great thing, but also has plagued the site for a long time in terms of what is it actually. And so officially it is an arboretum. It's Planting Fields Arboretum State Historic Park. So we are not even part of New York State Parks, has state historic sites and state historic parks. Technically we are part of the park system and not even the site system. So there's a lot of kind of technicalities like that we're working out right now. But as we have learned so much and are continuing to learn about the Olmsted heritage of the site and seeing that really as a significant opportunity for impact. That's the aspect of our site that makes us nationally significant, or in a place that people should really view as a destination. So that's why so much emphasis and priorities are being poured into that work. So yeah, so the master plan is hopefully 3 or 4 years away.
A question for both of you, because you're both dealing with LAs on your properties. And it's a long-term question, because you talk about long-term planning for an LA, and what is it, you had a 45-year span as opposed to Rafe Cobham's 500-year span in Britain. But many historic sites have to contend with the fact that they have aging alleys, and what do they do when they become snaggletooth? And how do they go about it? I mean, do they take the approach, you wipe it out and start again, like Marie Antoinette and the Tuileries, or do you try to infill the snaggletooth, and how is it cost effective?
Do you want to take this? So the beach LA at Planting Fields was beyond snaggletooth. A good example would be the replacement at Biltmore on the approach of the tulip trees. We generally recommend that when half your LA is gone, it's time to renew it. So there's kind of like a tipping point when you've lost the character of this continuity, and the issue is continuity. So what do you do to shift that out? I suggest that it's the 50% point, and you have to do a lot of good public outreach, because no one wants to kill trees, but also you might use some of the more elaborate arboriculture tools, let people know that things are not healthy, and so forth and so on. At Shelburne Farms, we replaced a beloved poplar LA that predated the design of Shelburne Farms 4 years ago. And one of the spins was to take the trunks down whole, and they were big, 50-something inches wide, and cut them in large pieces and have a maker of furniture and craftspeople receive those. So there are, ways to spin it, to use the wood, and ways to have people not be, ready to chain themselves to the trees.
One thing to that. So we are planting, Patricia, is it 84 new oak trees? But we're actually acquiring over 100. They've been sourced already, so we're going to have those planted elsewhere on the property, so at least we have an inventory of materials to, if we need to replace any. Yeah.
In the last couple of years, what we've done at Lincoln Boyhood is replace 2 aging, ill sycamores in the second row of the alley. What I've noticed that is an impending problem is that the Olmsted design was framed to be the row of tulips, the row of sycamores, to blend naturally into the existing forest. Well, of course, now we've got condensed second row of formal tree line with the encroaching branches of the forest, and I walk along the trail and look at those and think, I guess I'm going to need to be talking about that with somebody about what we do, because that is yet to be a topic for discussion, except between me and my staff. Oh, I want to say while I'm here, I have Nancy Hanks Lincoln cards for anybody who participated in the audience survey.
Well, on behalf of the Symposium team, I'd just like to say super big thanks to both our presenters. Very interesting, thoughtful projects. Yeah, thank you. And I believe we have a coffee break right now, if you'd like.